We gather together today as a dear family and friends of Richard Blum. As we mourn his loss, we must also celebrate the full, rich life he led. Death has taken our beloved Dick. Friends grieve in their darkened world. In their silence there is lamentation. In their tears there is loneliness. Lost in their sorrow, may they find the presence of loving friends. Hear them, O God, and be with them. For his love that united us in life and which death cannot sever. For his companionship which we shared along life's path and which still continues through the tenderness of memory. For the gifts of his heart and his mind which brought us joy and happiness and now become a precious heritage of the Spirit. For all these and more, God, we give you our praise. In his sorrow, Job cried out, Adonai natan v'nai lakach, Yehi Shem Adonai mevarach. God has given, God has taken away. Blessed be the name of God. An ancient people were well acquainted with grief and with the valley of shadows. Death and sorrow are not strangers to us. Yet the centuries have taught us that a good name endures beyond the grave, and there is strength in faith. With Job we say, Adonai natan, God you have given. You gave us a loved one who will not be forgotten. For all it was good and enduring in his life, we offer the deepest thanks of our hearts. A poem entitled, To My Father. A giant pine, magnificent and old, stood staunch against the sky, and all around shed beauty, grace, and power. Within its fold birds safely reared their young. Beneath was gentle, and the cooling shade gave cheer to passers-by. Its towering arms a landmark stood erect and unafraid, as if to say, fear not from life's alarms. But it fell one day. Where it had dauntless stood was loneliness and void. But men who passed paid tribute said, to know this life was good, it left its mark on me. Its work stands fast. And so it lives, such life no bonds can hold, this giant pine, magnificent and bold. A poem entitled, My Hereafter. Do not come, when I am dead, to sit beside a low green mound, or bring the first daffodils, because I love them so. For I shall not be there, you cannot find me there. I will look up at you from the eyes of little children. I will bend to meet you in the swaying boughs of bud-thrilled trees, and caress you with the passionate sweep of storm-filled winds. I will give you strength in your upward tread of everlasting hills. I will cool your tired body in the flow of the river. I will warm your work-glorified hands with the glow of the winter fire. I will soothe you into forgetfulness, to the drop of the rain on the roof. I will speak to you out of the rhymes of the masters, and I will dance with you in the lilt of the violin, and make your heart leap with the bursting cadence of the organ. I will flood your soul with the flaming radiance of the sunrise, and bring you peace in the tender rose and gold of the after sunset. All these have made me happy. They are part of me, and I shall become a part of them. He's achieved success who has lived well, laughed often, and loved much, who has gained the respect of intelligent men and love of little children, who has filled his niche and accomplished his task, who has left the world better than he found it, whether by an improved poppy, a perfect poem, or a rescued soul, who has never lacked appreciation of earth's beauty or failed to express it, who has always looked for the best in others and given the best he had, whose life was inspiration, whose memory a benediction. Adonai ro'i lo echsar, bina desha yar bitseni, amemer chot yanachaleni. Please join me in the words, if you're familiar, the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. Lead me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He lead me in right place for his sake's name. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Amen. The Baal Shem Tov, the Hasidic Rebbe, once observed that there are 3 ways we mourn. The first is with tears, the second is with silence, and the third is with song. We mourn someone truly beloved who experienced all 3. Tears at first, then silence as our grief settles more deeply, and finally song as we're able to celebrate the memories we hold deep in our hearts. Today may be a time for tears as we say our final goodbyes to Richard. We'll each remember Dick in our own way. Harriet, you remember Dick as your beloved husband. Peter, Anne, Jane and John, Elizabeth and Duncan, Joanna, Catherine, and Albert of blessed memory. We'll all remember Dick as a loving father, and your children, Lindsay, Michael, Victoria, Clara, Grove, Jacob, Isaac, Willem, Kira, Deanna, Tasha, Elena, and Jared. We'll all remember Dick as adoring grandfather. Dick was a caring brother and brother-in-law to John and Kathy and their family, and to Steve and Sue. Dick was born on March 30th, 1931, to Irma and Roger Blum. He was proud to be a lifelong Clevelander. When he was quite young, his family moved from Cleveland Heights to Shaker Heights. Dick graduated from Shaker Heights High School in 1949 and decided it would be great to learn to ski, so off he went to Dartmouth. Dick was an outdoors man long before it became popular. It was during those Dartmouth days that his friends bestowed upon him the nickname Bloss. With his deep, booming voice and hawk-like nose, and the information that Blum meant flower in German, his buddies declared, "You don't look like a blossom." And Bloss just stuck, thanks to that famous Dartmouth class of 1953. After college, Dick went into the Marine Corps, as we heard, and he was sent to officers' training. He was sent to Japan for the tail end of the Korean War. Soon he returned to Cleveland and to join his father's business. Dick married Edith Hirsch, and together they had 3 children, Peter, Anne, and Jane. They were married for over 2 decades before they divorced. Then Dick and Harriet were married in 1988, and Harriet's 3 children, Elizabeth, Joanna, and Catherine, became part of this wonderful blended family. As Dick liked to say, he introduced Harriet to athletic activities, and she introduced him to art. Truthfully, Harriet felt it was a prerequisite for getting married. She had to learn how to ski. And Dick's son-in-laws, fondly known as SOBs, or Sons of Bloss, also felt they had to learn to ski to become part of this family. Dick and Harriet enjoyed many ski trips and playing doubles tennis together, as well as collecting art. Dick's sense of curiosity led him to become genuinely interested in art once Harriet introduced him. He became curious about the art and the people who made art. He got very involved in his own way. In his 40s, Dick established Blossom Industries, a successful sales and engineering firm in a niche business, the commercial baking industry. He remained the president until his retirement a decade ago, and then he continued to do consulting for a number of years. You will all remember Dick's energetic and outgoing nature, his great sense of humor, and his love of the outdoors as an early runner, mountain climber, hiker, and distance bike rider. He was a member of Oakwood Country Club and one of the first members of the Cleveland Racquet Club. But most of all, you remember Dick's talent for friendships, a thread that carried throughout his entire life. From his kindergarten roll call, Bell, Berkowitz, Blum, Ronnie Bell and Donnie Berkowitz, and to shortly later in his teenage years, Bob Grease, all remained his closest friends for life, and dear friendships from his Dartmouth days. Dick had a knack for making friends. It was a theme that ran through every stage of his life. Bloss led a wonderful life, and although many of us might not appreciate the weather today, it's a tribute to him. He would say it's a great ski day. So today may be a time for tears. We are saddened by the loss of Dick, but we must remember how much we learned from him, especially how to care for one another. Let your tears serve to strengthen, uphold you as a family. There's a story in our Jewish tradition about a rabbi who once passed an old man planting trees. Sir, he called, why are you planting those trees? You'll never live to see them blossom. But the man replied, my ancestors planted trees, not for themselves, but for us, that we might enjoy their shade and their fruit. I too do the same for all those who will come after me. Dick planted an orchard for each one of us, an orchard filled with devotion and with love, and these will always be here for us. We must be grateful we were able to share in Dick's life. Tomorrow there'll be fewer tears, more silence. As the Baal Shem Tov noted, it'll be a time for pondering, a time for contemplation. Dick will become a greater part of our characters and our very beings as we integrate the memories and the values he taught us into our own selves. But finally there'll come a time for song. The time will come we can celebrate Dick when we recall all that we learned from him and how he touched each of our lives. May he rest in peace. Zecher Sadik Livracha. May the memory of Richard Blum always be a blessing. Let us say amen. I'd now like to invite first Peter to share some personal words about his father, and then we'll hear from two of Dick's son-in-laws, John DeMarchi and Duncan Lonsdale. And then I'll come up before the granddaughters.
Before I get started, I want to thank all of you for coming. Let you know this is probably going to be difficult for me. I expect to cry more than once. Thank you, Rabbi, for your very kind words, first of all. And thank you again for those of you who are tuning in and those of you who have braved the snow to come. It is indeed, it is a Dick Blum day because it's snowing, and I know that he would be saying wherever he was, geez, I wish I could be skiing. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. I think I can safely speak for Harriet and my sisters, which for those of you who know our family is not something you should do casually. But I think I can safely speak for all of us when I express my gratitude for the hundreds and maybe thousands by now of kind messages, phone calls, notes that we've received. It's the volume of it and the heartfelt nature of it is just, it's overwhelming. It really shows me the mark that Dad left on all of us. You know, when you live a life that's 90 years long and when you live those 90 years as large as Dad did, there are bound to be a few stories. And if we had the time, we could all tell a story. I've heard so many stories that have made me say that is classic Dick Blum in the last week. It's just amazing. But we don't have all day. And Dad admired a tight schedule, probably more than most people did. So as the rabbi said, we're going to try to paint a picture of Dad through some of our memories. After I speak, my brothers-in-law, John and Duncan, will speak, and then my daughter, Lindsay, and my niece, Clara, and my niece, Tasha, will speak also. And I think with those, I think that will give you a very complete picture of Dad, I hope. You know, Dad was a terrific provider to all of us, to my sisters and me, to Harriet, to Mom, to the grandkids. We have enough grandkids to field a football team if we wanted to. But he's a lot more than that. As we saw, a loyal Marine, a proud resident of Cleveland his whole life. I said to somebody the other day, Dad could have lived anywhere at some point in his life, and he would never leave Cleveland. He got Harriet to leave New York. That's how much he loved Cleveland. One of the things that defined Dad for me right at the start was work. Even in the confines of our family, the work was very, very important. Most of Dad's business was centered in Ohio, in New York, and in Pennsylvania. And when we were kids, maybe coincidentally, maybe not, most of the trips that we took as a family were to New England and upstate New York and the East Coast. And guess what's between here and there? All of the customers. And so every trip we took, we would stop at a bakery or two, or sometimes three, or a supermarket office. You know, sometimes we'd have to sit in the parking lot, but sometimes we would get to go in. And my favorite memory still of the places we got to go in was this place in Buffalo called Kaufman's Bakery, run by the Friedman family. I see some of the bakery colleagues nodding their head. You know who I'm talking about. The bakery's no longer in business, but believe it or not, when we were kids, little kids, we were allowed to run the production floor while Dad was having his meeting. You can't imagine that now, but if you've never had the taste or smell of fresh rye bread right off the oven, you're missing something. I remember that. Just standing here talking about it, I remember it. And at every stop, you'd see Dad would talk to the people who owned the place, but he would also be out on the floor talking with the people who ran the equipment. The guy could talk to anybody. And I figured out later, of course, all the bakery stops meant that Dad could write off the mileage on the trip if he wanted to, which I'm sure he did. My sisters and I still get a receipt for anything. That's what we were taught to do. When I was little, I resented sometimes that he was gone all the time, and it wasn't until I got a little older that I figured out if there's no business trips, there's no ski trips, and there's no nice car, and there's no nice clothes, and there's no nice house. And once you got to be a little bit older to figure that out. But the work, Dad understood the value of the work, and he understood what the work brought him, and he worked really hard, and we missed him a lot, but we are the ones who profited from that, quite frankly. He was not, I think, Dad was never big on saying, here's the lesson. I'm going to teach you a lesson now. He didn't raise us that way. We learned lessons by watching him. So I want to talk a little bit about the outdoors thing and where that came from. That was one of another defining thing about Dad, besides, after the work. When Dad was little, my grandparents, Roger and Irma, sent Dad and my Uncle John to Camp Manitoma in Maine. And I think back then, a lot of people sent their kids to camp partly just to send them away. And if the kids learned some life lessons along the way, that was just icing on the cake. Well, Camp Manitoma taught my dad some life lessons that I don't think Roger and Irma ever intended or anticipated. It defined almost everything that he did thereafter. That's where he got bitten by the outdoors bug. That's where he got bitten by the bug of New England. When it came time to apply to college, Dad was going one place. It's basically the closest place he could go to Maine. He went to Dartmouth. He learned to camp there. He learned to hike there. He learned to canoe there. He did that almost to his dying day. I think as Dad was getting older, one of the things that pained him the most was that he couldn't do the hiking anymore, and he couldn't do the skiing anymore, and that really hurt him. So sometime in his 20s, maybe it was before Dartmouth, around Dartmouth, he saw a ski movie. And when he saw the ski movie, he decided that was the sport for him. And that's one of the reasons that he went to Dartmouth. And I'm sure that he had to teach Mom to ski too, as he had to teach Harriet to ski. Now, one thing about Dad, and the skiing is where it really came into play. Dad never did anything halfway, right? So when we were little, very little, I think I learned to ski I think I first skied when I was 4. We were going to only go to the place where the snow is the best. And it's not where you think it is. Where the snow in the best where you can also stop at bakeries on the way, is a little town called Turin, New York. It's in upstate New York, and the mountain is called Snow Ridge. If you want some scale, the sledding hill across the street at Kane Park, which a lot of us have very fond memories of, is about the vertical drop of Snow Ridge. So much later, Dad skied all over the world. The number of times he went to Alta, to Vail, to Europe, all over the place. It all started on this little place, this little hill in Turin, New York, because that's where the snow is the best. Our friends were going to Vermont, to Colorado. We're going to Turin, New York. It's a tough 8-hour drive from here, too. I don't mind telling you. It's not easy to get to. Besides learning to ski, I think we all learned a little bit about hardship. We learned about perseverance. And I think we also learned about if you want to do something, you do it the right way, period. That's sort of the Dick Blum ethos. Skiing also extended beyond our family. Sometime in the 90s or the 2000s, Dad got this idea. Here's another way the business can pay for skiing. The Blossom Bakery Symposium was convened every year in December, usually at Alta, sometimes at Vail, and it was Dad and a half a dozen or so of his bakery equipment buddies, men that I got to know very, very well. And those trips were very, very formative. And the point I want to leave about the skiing is the last trip that we took, the last symposium trip that there was, I think it was around 2014 or 15. It was at Alta, and on the last day, we're getting ready to leave the mountain, and we're piling into the cars, and everyone's getting in the cars, but Dad is over at the edge of the parking lot with his skis in his hand, and he's facing the mountain. Here comes one of the crying points. He's facing the mountain, and he's talking. You can see that he's talking. He's got his skis in his hand, and he's like gesticulating with his other hand. And I didn't go up to him. I just watched it. And then later that night, I said, "What were you saying at the mountain?" And he said, "Mountain stuff, personal stuff." It just meant so much to him. And I think he knew that he wasn't coming back. And in fact, Ann and I had been back to Alta, but Dad never went back. And he knew, and he wanted to tell the mountain that. And it was just very powerful. I remember then, like I said before, my dad was not one for powerful moments, but boy, that was a powerful moment. One more thing about the outdoors. When he was deeply into his mountain climbing phase, he bought me a subscription. He's trying to get me to do the same thing. He bought me a subscription to this magazine called Outside. It's a glossy magazine for the adventure set. And, I read it. Sometimes it's interesting. Sometimes it's not. One spring, an issue comes, and it's got this screaming headline, and pardon my French, but the screaming headline, 20 trips from hell, it said. Well, I'd read that, wouldn't you? Right? So you start reading through. The first anecdote in the article is this harrowing tale of this American climbing party in Nepal that gets nearly killed by an avalanche. I get about halfway through this, and I realize this is Dad's avalanche story. And I know you're all laughing. You know the story I'm talking about, right? It was in this national magazine. He's not mentioned. I think that was written by his climbing friend, George Shaw, if I remember. But, he never said, "Oh, there's this magazine going to come out with my story." He knew. I called him and I said, "Well, that's some story." "I know. Isn't that some story?" Last night, Jane and I found his diary that he wrote. And it's an incredibly harrowing tale, what happened to them. And the fact that they all lived through it is quite amazing. So the last aspect that I want to address about Dad is Dartmouth College. After camp in New England, as I said, Dad knew he wanted to go to college in the mountains, so the only place he could go was Dartmouth. Now, many of you know that we Dartmouth alums fancy ourselves to be the most loyal college alumni that there are in the world. And within the Dartmouth community, that loyalty is unmatched by the class of 1953. And within that group, I would say Dad was at the top of the loyal men of Dartmouth. He was a class officer. He served on the alumni council for many years, which is a prestigious body at the college. He won the alumni award, which is very prestigious. He was the class secretary. He used to write a Christmas poem every year in rhyme and in verse. It would mention about 100 members of his class and something that they had done over the course of the year. He did it every year. It was the most amazing thing. When we were kids, the placemats around the breakfast table were the placemats from the Hanover Inn. It was a map of the campus. You know the kind, it's the flimsy paper kind. Use it once, you throw it away. Well, Dad's up there sometime, and he takes a whole stack of them, and he gets them laminated. So that's what we grew up eating our breakfast on. In 1981, I went to Dartmouth. The first thing they give you is a campus map. And I'm like, I don't need this map. I've been staring at it my whole life. A couple of years ago, Dad asked me to accompany him to Hanover for his 65th reunion. And he knew, I sort of knew, but he knew that it was going to be the last time that he went up there. Maybe the most meaningful single place in his life. When we drove up from Boston, as we got closer, he got more and more excited. When you come into Hanover, you got to come up this hill, pretty steep hill. And we're coming up the hill, and he just had this ear-to-ear grin on his face. Didn't go away the whole weekend. Some people have asked me about my tie, my dinosaur necktie. Some years before that, there was a Dartmouth event that several of Dad's classmates were at, and there was a bunch of younger people around, and somebody in the group said, "Look at all these young people, we're just a bunch of dinosaurs." And one of Dad's classmates, a gentleman named Al Collins, who died last year, was a haberdasher his whole life. So he knew people who make neckties. So by the time the next time they had gotten together, Al had these Dartmouth dinosaur neckties made. And you got one only if you were a classmate or an honor. As they began to dwindle, like dinosaurs do, they made some people some honorary classmates. So there's a few of us wearing the dinosaur tie. That's That's the significance of it. One more thing, and then I'm going to wrap up. On that trip, much like at Alta, the night before we left, after the dinner where we were all wearing the ties, he went out to the green, the Dartmouth Green, and he stood on the green facing Baker Library. It's an iconic structure. It's very pretty. And it's the iconic structure of Dartmouth, and he started talking. And I was across the street watching this. He started talking, and he's gesticulating. And I knew better than to ask him again what he had talked about. But he was just profoundly moved by Dartmouth, and he was profoundly moved by skiing and by his friendships. And that's what defines Dad for me. Thank you again.
Thank you, Peter. Hi, I'm John DeMarchi. My wife is Jane Blum, Dick's youngest daughter, and it's an honor to speak about Dick Blum with you today. It's an honor to wear this tie and be an honorary member of the class of 1953 at Dartmouth, of which I was not a member. As you heard from Peter, you'll hear today, Dick meant a lot to many, many people. He was a role model, an inspiration, and a hero to me. In so many ways, he taught me how to live well. I was 22 years old when I met Dick, and before then, I was 22 years old when I met Dick. Before then, I looked forward to vacations. Growing up, my family went on nice ones, like to Florida and Toronto. When I got to know Dick, I noticed he didn't go on vacations. He went on trips. For him, travel meant exploration. It meant adventure. While ordinary folks went on vacation, extraordinary people like Dick Blum went on expeditions. What kind of expeditions? He climbed in Nepal. He skied in Europe in the Rockies. He biked the hardest mountain stages of the Tour de France. He stayed in Maasai villages in Kenya. And for years, we had a photo of Dick posing with 3 Maasai warriors in our kitchen. And perhaps you've seen it. Dick is the one wearing the Dartmouth hat. Who can hear about Dick's adventures without saying, I wish for such a life for myself? His journeys reflected his values and his passions. See more, learn more, do more, live more. He was at home wherever he went, as comfortable in snow squalls as he was at the Ritz-Carlton. His secret, dress impeccably, and pack every possible item of Patagonia in a huge duffel. When Jane and I lived in Shanghai, Dick and Harriet came to see us. After leading us across the city in search of artist studios, they left with a stunning painting by Ji Wenyu, an up-and-coming Chinese artist. Last Saturday, I sat under that painting in Harriet's office, where it's a prized possession. Dick had an entire coterie of traveling companions and close friends. And unless the trip involved crampons, bindings, or chain rings, Harriet was travel companion number 1. Dick and Harriet visited our family so many times in Bethesda, they always made sure they were there for their grandchildren's plays, performances, and graduations. I was lucky enough to be included in a few of Dick's expeditions. One of my favorites was when Dick was 84 years old. We biked the Great Allegheny Passage from Pittsburgh to Cumberland, Maryland, with our family and friends, Jane and Ann, David Watson, Catherine and Albert Kim. It was 3 days and 160 miles. Dick showed what it meant to be a lifelong athlete. He never stopped pushing himself. Cycling, tennis, skiing, reading the New York Times on his spin bike, or just stretching and using the machines at Equinox on 74th and 2nd. On all his expeditions, Dick would never slow down. Age was nothing to him. It was hard for us to keep up, whether we were biking together in Westport, hiking the White Mountains with the Sons of Bloss, or skiing Black Diamonds in Alta, just trekking across Manhattan searching for Levain cookies. Dick set the pace. During his 80 on 80 birthday ride in sweltering Cleveland heat, Dick pushed on with Jane and me so he would have time to freshen up before his birthday party. That day, he proved to us that aging and growing old are not the same thing. One event we thought might slow him down was his expedition to the top of Parchamo, a 20,000-foot peak southeast of Everest, at the age of 72 that Peter just discussed. He wrote the story of his adventure in an essay. He said, with the top in view, he pushed on up the mountain, repeating the mantra, "We're doing it, we're doing it, we're doing it," just before an avalanche swept him and his teammates down 1,200 feet. Perhaps Dick loved life so much because he came so close to losing it that day. Dick's grit provokes awe. Once a Marine, always a Marine, they say. His expeditions and achievements are an inspiration. And for me, vacations will never be the same. Dick's spirit of adventure and joy for life has provided me with a North Star. In George Bush's eulogy for his father, George H.W. Bush, he said, "I once heard it said of men that the idea is to die young as late as possible." Dick never stopped being young. Life was too beautiful, the adventure too epic to ever grow old. Dick, Kahatan and the Granite Mountains have called you one last time. You'll always be in our hearts. Rest in peace.
I'm just going to warn you now, there's going to be some overlap in some of these themes. So I'm Duncan Lonsdale. My wife is Elizabeth Lonsdale, Harriet's daughter. My 3 children are here, Dee Dee, Willem, and Kara. In my life, I've never been so happy and so proud to be called an SOB. And never so fortunate to marry into this incredibly warm and loving family. Bloss and Harriet are like the best parents and grandparents one could ever have. They worked as a team and brought together these 2 blended families in such a successful way and made an impact on all of us. They treated everybody the same, with the same amount of love. Son, daughter, grandchild, whether by blood or by marriage, it didn't matter. Bloss was never comfortable using the word step, which speaks to how he views family. Bloss was always supportive, reliable, genuinely interested in what we're all up to, and was always there for sound advice. But he was also a lot of fun, and never fell short of interesting stories at the dinner table. When I first met Bloss, he was easy to get to know and connect with, largely because his interests and curiosities were so broad. He was certainly so knowledgeable about so many things. My first experience being in awe of Bloss as an athlete was at our 1994 ski trip in Taos. I was a beginner then, and what a place to learn how to ski. There, I quickly realized that Bloss and all of his kids are really good skiers. So I couldn't use the excuse of being from Ohio for not being a good skier, because I just didn't have a dad like Bloss. Not surprising, my first outing as an official SOB member was a ski trip, of course, in Alta. Bloss hosted an amazing trip, and we were treated like kings. It was my first time there, and I'll always associate Alta with Bloss and the Blum family. Years later, the SOBs regrouped and had an equally enjoyable outing, a multi-day camping trip in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, a region of this country near and dear to Bloss's beloved alma mater. My brother-in-law, Albert, diligently organized the entire trip. Those two fine men had a lot in common and created a big impact on my life. At the White Mountains trip, Bloss was 81 at the time, and the hiking was not easy. We wore packs of gear, and the hiking days were long, up and down, navigating boulders, tree roots, and other obstacles. Bloss demonstrated once again that he was able to embrace physically demanding challenges. Then there's the annual family vacations. These were indeed a special gift that Harriet and Bloss gave to all of us, and undoubtedly the reason why our families are so close to this day. Perhaps our most cherished gathering was at Westport Point, Massachusetts, where we went for 7 years in a row. I believe Harriet found this house, the Sinton House, in the Wellesley newsletter classified, and it was called Grandmother's Special. Is that right? She jumped on it. I don't recall how many rooms the house had, but it was a perfect spot for the elders, plus 5 young families to meet up for a week of summer fun. Bloss was the master of the house and made sure everything was in ship shape, running trips to the dump, making sure that the highly trafficked kitchen floor had to be constantly swept and mopped, as any respectable former Marine would. He wouldn't have it any other way. We made numerous trips to Lee's grocery store. I think Bloss just really liked being in supermarkets. One would think that several carts full of groceries for this giant family would last for at least a few days. It never did. A trip to Lee's ended up being a daily event. And I think with Bloss, it was probably because he probably always seemed to think we needed more bread in the house. So in those 7 years at Westport, one or more new babies kept arriving. After 13 grandchildren and 13 adults, we outgrew this large house. And going forward, we summered in a variety of other venues. But no matter where we ended up, the reunions were always terrific because all of our families were together. So well done, Bloss and Harriet. There was always one task that Bloss always made sure had to happen at these summer reunions, and that was to have our annual photo for his beloved Bloss, or his famously Christmas cards that he, holiday cards, sorry, that were very important to him. Each sub-family had to wear its team colors, and prior to each year's reunion, Bloss always made a point to remind us repeatedly, don't forget your family T-shirt for the photos. Those cards are even more special now because our final card was in 2020, and now we've lost a second family member from that card. Biking. Bloss had his biking buddies for sure, and he participated in some epic trips through Europe and elsewhere. I'm pleased that I got to put on some biking miles with Bloss and got to meet some of his dear friends. Biking from Shaker through Gates Mills and then down into the Chagrin Valley was always one of the highlights of my trips to Cleveland. And in New York, where I live, I could return the favor, and I showed Bloss some of my favorite biking routes. I'm so grateful that we had all these biking trips or time together because unlike his other passions, I'm just an average skier and an average tennis player. Then, of course, as has been mentioned, there's the epic 80 on 80 in 2011. 80 kilometers, that's really far for anybody at any age. And you said it was sweltering heat. I remember it as being a perfect day, but, you know. A perfect day in Cleveland, I guess it's not raining and not cloudy. But if I make it to 80, I may just steal that idea. So the final personal story I'd like to share. Whenever Bloss came to the city, he'd always invite Albert and me for lunch at the Yale Club. and this may be my most cherished personal memory as it speaks to my love language, the act of spending quality time with someone, and became a really nice tradition. The dining room at the Yale Club was slightly formal but not stuffy, but always felt festive. Bloss mostly ordered the Cobb salad. The Yale Club had very good Cobb salads, still does, but it was always more about the company than the food. And I'd add that Bloss didn't just make the effort to spend lunch with Albert and me. He also included a one-on-one lunch with Joanna, my other sister-in-law, who is not here today. I asked her recently if there's any special memory that she'd like me to share on her behalf, and she said it was lunches with Bloss. Sounds like a really simple thing. It was a really special and nice thing that he really thought of everybody. Bloss, you are so many wonderful things, rugged and adventurous, yet loving and a gentleman. And in the 30 years that I've known you, you've never forgotten to write me a handwritten birthday card. There is nobody like you. It was an honor to know you, to learn from you, and I and all of us will miss you dearly. Thank you for being a role model to me and many others.
Thank you all for your beautiful, heartfelt words. And now we'll hear from three granddaughters, Lindsay Blum, Clara Hack, and Natasha Kim. That order.
Good afternoon. My name is Lindsay Blum, and earlier you heard from my father, Peter. Oh, sorry. So far you've heard a lot about the Sons of Bloss and the amazing adventures they've been on. They've backpacked the White Mountains, they've skied the Rockies, but now it's time to introduce you to another contingency, the granddaughters of Bloss. The GOB were a highly elite group. We don't have as eloquent of an acronym as the SOBs, but we do take quite a bit of pride in being the GOBs. Today you'll hear from three of us, myself and my cousins, Clara and Tasha, as we share our favorite memories of my grandpa and the lessons he taught us. One thing about my grandpa that I'm sure everyone here would agree with, and as my dad mentioned, is he really never did anything halfway. If it was worth doing, it was worth doing well. He took care to eliminate any inefficiencies and really make the most out of every single experience. And this was really true no matter how ordinary the thing was. For example, a few years ago, my brother Michael and I were staying with him while we were in Cleveland for Thanksgiving. One morning, Michael and I go on a jog. It's really nothing special. We're not training for anything. We just sort of go, very normal. We get back. Grandpa pulls me into the office and quizzes me, well, where did you go? And I said, well, we don't really know. We just picked a direction and went with it. That's not up to snuff for my grandpa. So that afternoon, I come back later and I go into the apartment. He pulls me into the office, and he had printed out a map and drawn out a route from Moreland Courts to Horseshoe Lake Park, complete with mile markers. He walks me through each turn, making sure I understand. And as I stand up to leave, I'm thinking that we're done. He says, put on your shoes. I have to drive around the route to show you where it is. The kicker is he was right. It was a way better run than what we had done. It was much prettier, and it really elevated what was just a typical morning jog. And thanks to his map and the drive along, I didn't get lost. Not only is this a great example of the way he approached everyday activities, it's also emblematic of his love for the outdoors and his athleticism, much of what you've heard about so far. My grandpa was impossible to impress. He's done about everything and been about everywhere, and he had some high standards. And the only way to really impress him was through grueling athletic challenges. As an aside, I think that the only family athletic accomplishment that has truly impressed him was Duncan finishing an Ironman, just to show you how high the bar really is here. So Grandpa decides that he wants us all to bike 80 kilometers for his 80th birthday, as you've heard, and I saw this as an opportunity to really show off my grit, and then I can keep up with the group. At the time, I was a D1 collegiate rower, and I thought, I have this in the bag. Don't even need to worry about it. It took all of probably 10 kilometers for my grandpa and his buddies to pass me up. They passed me early, and I spent the rest of the ride huffing and puffing, wondering how these guys were doing it. I'd like to think that I gave him a birthday gift he actually appreciated, which is proving that he could still show us up. He also taught me that day that if I was going to impress anyone, best not think I had it in the bag before even starting. I'll finish with a quick story that represents my grandpa to a T. A few years ago, we came to Cleveland for one of the infamous Blum warm family trips. I had just bought a new car, the first car I bought myself, and I was very excited to show it off to Grandpa. He was a bona fide car guy, and I needed his nod of approval for my choice. So he gets in the car, he lets me show off, and then we start discussing his latest car dilemma. You know, the lease on his car was up, and he couldn't decide if he should upgrade or just renew the lease on the car that he had. And at the time, he's around 87. He's not doing a lot of driving, and I'm a little surprised that we're discussing these options. And so I suggest, what about just not having a car? You know, you can be a one-car household. Completely miffed that I even hinted at his age, he said, maybe when I'm older. My grandpa left us with a blueprint for a great life and an adventurous life worth living. He never thought he was finished, and he always searched for the next adventure. I consider myself lucky, and I'm very proud to be a GOB, and I will miss him greatly. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Clara. I'm another GOB. This is my brother Grove. He's my emotional support brother, in case I cry and can't finish it out. So we'll see how this goes. Our mom is Anne. She's over there. We left her for this one, so we'll do it quickly so we can get back. My grandpa would have loved today. The rabbi said it perfectly. It is so snowy, his perfect day. In the words of Dick Blum, it'll burn off for sure. So too will the sadness that is with us all, and we will be left behind with some great memories and some classic grandpa stories. My grandpa and I shared a few key loves in our lives. Mountains, as you've heard, Mitchell's Vanilla Bean Ice Cream, lacrosse, and our family. I remember telling him about how I was planning to work in Yellowstone one summer. He then shared with me his experience when he worked out west at a dude ranch in Wyoming. We both drove across the country with little notion of what we were getting ourselves into, and our lives were both left forever changed. I can't recall another moment where I've ever felt so connected to him. My grandfather was truly an icon. I could stand up here, as I'm sure most of the people in the room could, and share a classic Dick Blum story where he proved himself worthy of such a title. But instead, I want to share what he taught me and how he shaped this whole family. Grandpa valued his family, work, and the outdoors. If you take a look at us grandchildren, the 13 of us all from different lives, states, ages, whatever, we are all united by our love for the outdoors and our love for each other. Additionally, we are all united by our love and respect for Grandpa. I think this is the first time in maybe 5 years all 13 have been in the same room at the same time. We all share a love that was founded long before we were born. Grandpa taught our parents how to be, and they showed us. There wasn't a place around where Grandpa didn't know someone. I remember once being at the airport with him when he stopped the dude driving the trolley through the terminals to ask about how he was doing and how his wife was. He would take the time to engage with others, and he had a great way of making people feel seen. He taught me the value of taking a moment to learn someone's story. His influence reaches far beyond what I can capture in a 3-minute remembrance speech. His lessons will stand with me throughout my entire life, and I will share his message. It is never too late to do the right thing, as my mom often reminded us growing up. There is no expiration date to saying thank you or I'm sorry. A note or call is always appreciated, and if you think you should reach out, what's stopping you? Kindness always went a long way for our grandpa. Many of our grandpa's lessons made their way into our home growing up. Grove and I were often reminded to always put your stuff in a bag, only true men wear pink, and be prepared for any adventure. I remember calling him a few years ago, and just a regular conversation. He was checking in on me, I was checking in on him. I remember him saying, I'm really tired. I can't believe it. I don't want to say it, but I'm just a little tired. And I said, you've lived such a long life, and you've filled every second of it. It makes sense that this now is your time to rest, you know? It's a time for you to be tired. And he said, I've never thought about it that way. An iconic man left behind many life lessons and filled our family with happy memories and legendary stories. I know my grandpa would have loved to see the family together today on this beautiful, snowy day. May his memory be a blessing, and may all of us use some Dick Blum advice in our lives. Thank you.
Hi, thanks everyone for being here today. My name is Tasha Kim, and I am one of Bloss's granddaughters. One of 13 grandchildren, to be exact. I was thinking about what to share today and reflecting on what being a member of our family has meant to me. We've been incredibly lucky to have such a large family. I myself have 2 decades of memories, 20 years of reunions, dinners, trips to the beach, backyard barbecues, and Bloss colors almost everyone. I'm not the first to mention this, but if you knew Bloss, you knew he loved trips to the grocery store. One common refrain was a quick, I'm just going for some fruit, just for a vegetable, and after which he would return 2 hours later with much more than just what he had come for. It was always bread, usually an entire bag of delicious foods and snacks. I think this exasperated our grandmother, Harriet, but it definitely delighted all of his grandchildren. And more importantly, I think it speaks to the kind of person he was. Thoughtful, considerate, kind, always thinking of other people, never wanting anyone to go a moment without. Not without a snack, a bag of granola, or a delicious bite of fruit salad, which he was famous for. No visit to Cleveland was complete without having breakfast with Bloss in the kitchen, and more recently, sharing scoops of Mitchell's ice cream, which we ate at lunch and dinner because, hey, life is short, and it's always a good time for ice cream. Bloss trekked everywhere, from the Rockies to the White Mountains, skiing, biking, climbing around the world. I think many of us grew up inspired by his feats, enthralled by the possibility that we too could go out and accomplish the kinds of things most people only read about in magazines. As I started going on adventures myself, there was nothing better than catching up with Bloss and having him say, "Tell me all about it." He was never satisfied with a quick answer. He wanted to know every run we had skied, how the conditions were on the mountain, what it had been like at the summit. He was always interested in our lives, asking the hard questions, looking for the details. As I mentioned before, I'm one of 13 grandchildren. It's a large number, and it would have been easy for one of us to fall through the cracks. But to be a grandchild of Bloss meant receiving a handwritten card every year on your birthday. It was always perfectly timed, so it was never late. He never forgot. And anyone that ever visited his home office would find an impressive display of family photos, accounting for every single member, and often updated with the most recent photos as we grew older, graduated, and had other important milestones in our lives. It was amazing. My dad passed away last March. I know that if you were still here, he'd probably be up here with me. Talking about the impact Bloss had on his life. He's not here, so I'll try my best to share what I think he might have said. Technically, my dad was a husband of Bloss's stepdaughter. But in practicality, Bloss was like a father to him. He had lost his own father as an adult, and in many ways, Bloss filled that role for him. They could spend hours talking about hiking trips they'd been on or planning, things they had read in the news, how all the different members of her family were doing. And I think that was one of the best things about Bloss. He welcomed so many people in as members of his family, regardless of their background and their interests. And he treated everyone with the same warmth, kindness, and care. And we're all so lucky to have had him in our lives.
Thank you all for your beautiful, heartfelt words. Really beautiful. Birth is a beginning, and death a destination. But life is a journey, a going, a growing from stage to stage, from childhood to maturity, and youth to age, from innocence to awareness and ignorance to knowing, from foolishness to discretion and perhaps to wisdom, from weakness to strength or strength to weakness and often back again, from health to sickness and back we pray to health again, from offense to forgiveness, from loneliness to love, from joy to gratitude, from pain to compassion, and grief to understanding, from fear to faith, from defeat to defeat to defeat, until looking backward ahead, we see victory lies not at some high place along the way, but in having made the journey, stage by stage, a sacred pilgrimage. Birth is a beginning, and death a destination. But life is a journey, a sacred pilgrimage made stage by stage to life everlasting. Amen. Please rise now, if you are able, for our memorial prayers, El Malei Rachamim, and then the Mourner's Kaddish. El Malei Rachamim, Shochen Bamromim, Hamsei Minocha Nechona Tachat Kanfei Hashchina, Im Kedoshim Tehorim, Kazora Harakia Mazhirim, Et Nishmat Haish Hatov Hazeh, Shalach Laolamo, Bal Harachamim, Yashirechu Beseter Kenafav Laolamim, Vayitzra Bitra Chachim Et Nishmato, Adonai Hu Nachalato, Vayanuach Beshalom Al Mishkavo Venomar. Amen. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to our beloved Richard Blum, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in your eternal presence, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace, and let us all say, Amen. And now we'll join in the Mourner's Kaddish, which is on the card that you are holding. Yit gadal v'yit kadash shemei rabba, b'yalma divrach hirute, v'yamlich malchute, b'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayei rachol beit Yisrael, b'gala uv'izman kari v'yimru. Amen. Yehei shemei rabba mivarach leolam ulamei amaya. Yit barach v'yishtabach v'yit pa'ar v'yit roman v'yit naseh v'yit hadar v'yit alel v'yit halal shemei dekudesha barichu leila min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata damiran b'alma v'imru. Amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru. Amen. Osei shalom ben romav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru. Amen. May God grant peace to those who mourn and comfort all the bereaved among us. And we all say, Amen. You may be seated for just a moment. Lech ki shalach Adonai, go your way, for God has called you. Lech v'nayeh mach, go your way and may God be with you. V'halach lefanecha zikecha kavod Adonai especha. May your righteousness go before you. May the memory of your life very present in hearts and minds of all those who have known you and loved you, and may the glory of God receive you. Amen. This concludes our memorial service. Thank you.